Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Today we will discuss about our collaborative translation project based on the Petronas Integrated Report 2020. And for this assignment, we worked together to translate a section of a financial report from English to Malay, analyze the translation quality, and discuss the strategies we use during the translation process. Before we begin, let me introduce our group members and roles. As for me, I am Edina and I am the group moderator for today.
My name is Norbetisha and I am the first translator.
My name is Aisha Humaira and I am the second translator.
My name is Ainur Shafika and I am the language analyst.
And my name is Noalis Rabilizaki and I am the terminology researcher.
Today's discussion will be divided into three phases. First is the group formation and role distribution. Secondly is the collaborative translation workshop. And last but not least is the comparative analysis and peer sharing. So for the phase one, in the first phase, our group discussed how to divide the work fairly according to each member's strength and availability. Because its assignment involved financial and accounting terminology, we agreed that each member should have a specific role to make the workflow more organized and efficient. I act as the group moderator. My responsibilities include organizing discussion, coordinating tasks, compiling the final version, and ensuring that all members completed their parts on time. Now I will invite each member to explain their role.
As the first translator, I was responsible for translating the first section of the Petronas report. My section mainly focused on business combinations, acquisition methods, transfer of control, and identifiable assets and liabilities. Before translating, I first read the entire text several times to understand the overall meaning and context, because financial reports use very formal and technical language. One challenge I faced was that accounting texts contain long and complicated sentence structures. So instead of translating word for word, I focused on preserving the intended meaning while making the Malay version sound formal and natural. For example, the phrase business combinations are accounted for using the acquisition method. So I translated that as gabungan perniagaan diambil kira menggunakan kaedah pengambilalihan. I chose diambil kira because it is commonly used in accounting context in Malay.
As translator 2, I handled the second part of the report. My section focused more on equity interest, subsidiaries, goodwill, bargain purchase gains, and non-controlling interest. One difficulty I experienced was translating technical accounting concepts accurately because some English terms do not have direct Malay equivalents. For example, the term goodwill cannot simply be translated literally. In accounting terminology, the accepted Malay term is muhibah. Another challenge was maintaining consistency with the first translator's writing style, teacher's writing style. Since two people translated different sections, we needed to ensure the final translation sounded unified. And that is why collaboration and peer review were very important in this assignment.
And for me, as the language analyst, my role was to review the translated text carefully. I focused on three main aspects: which is grammar, vocabulary usage, and also semantic accuracy. I compared the original English text with the Malay translation sentence by sentence to ensure the meaning remained accurate. For grammar, I check sentence structure, spelling, word choice, and also formal writing style. And for vocabulary, I evaluated whether the business and accounting terms sounded professional and natural in Malay. And lastly, for semantic accuracy, I checked whether the translation preserved the original meaning without changing the accounting concept. I also provided suggestion and correction in the share document using comment mode.
As for me, as a terminology researchers, my task was to identify the important financial and business terms from both the source text and target text. I also create a glossary containing English term, Malay translation, and definition or meanings. The glossary helped us to ensure the consistency throughout the translation. For example, from the source text, business combination, acquire, fair value, equity interest, and equity transaction. I also include explanation for each term so the group could have a better understanding the accounting concept before translating term.
After assigning our roles, we moved to the next phase, which was the collaborative translation workshop. In this phase, we divided the Petronas report into equal sections according to the number of translators. We used Google Docs as our shared workspace because it allowed everyone to edit, comment, and review the document collaboratively in real time. Now, Tisha will explain her translation process in more detail.
Okay, so when translating the first section, I noticed that the Petronas report used formal accounting language and passive sentence structures. For example, the identifiable assets acquired and liabilities assumed are measured at their fair values. This sentence was difficult because of terms like identifiable assets, liabilities assumed, and fair value. They have very specific meanings in accounting. So I translated it as aset yang boleh dikenal pasti, diperoleh dan liability yang diambil alih diukur pada nilai saksamanya. Initially, I used liability yang diandaikan, but after feedback from the language analyst, we realized that diambil alih was semantically more accurate. So this has showed how important peer review was during this process.
Thank you, Tisha. Now Aisha will explain her section.
Okay, for my section, one of the most difficult parts was the sentence. The group measures goodwill as the excess of the cost of an acquisition. This sentence was very long and contained several accounting concepts in one structure. At first, my translation sounded too literal and difficult to understand. So I discussed with the group and we decided to simplify the sentence structure slightly while still preserving the original meaning. We also discussed whether to use kombinasi perniagaan or gabungan perniagaan, and we finally agreed to use gabungan perniagaan because it sounded more natural in Malay formal writing. Another challenge was maintaining terminology consistency between both translators. So the glossary prepared by Nis was very helpful for us.
Thank you, Aisha. Now Shah will explain the language analysis process and some corrections made during the review stage.
So, during the review process, I identified several grammatical and semantic issues. For grammar analysis, the first example was from the original translation, dari tarikh diambil alih. but we suggested correction is dari tarikh pengambil alihan. This correction was made because the original phrase sounded less formal and grammatically awkward in Malay academic writing. Another example was muhibah yang timbul daripada kombinasi perniagaan. I suggest changing it to muhibah yang timbul daripada gabungan perniagaan because gabungan is more contextually appropriate and consistent with earlier terminology. Next is for vocabulary usage analysis. For vocabulary usage, I check whether the translated terms match professional accounting language. For example, the original sentence was anak syarikat and I suggested to subsidiary. It's because although anak syarikat is understandable, subsidiary is more commonly used in accounting and financial reporting. Next, another example is penguasai kawalan, and we suggested to memperoleh kawalan because the second phrase sounds more natural and professional in business context. And lastly, for the semantic accuracy analysis, semantic accuracy was one of the most important aspect. For example, the original sentence is liability yang diandaikan and I suggested to liability yang diambil alih. This correction was important because the phrase assume liabilities in accounting refers to liabilities transferred during acquisition, not liabilities that are merely assumed theoretically. And lastly, another example involved is kepentingan tidak mengawal because some version use kepentingan bukan kawalan. However, after discussion, we agreed that kepentingan tidak mengawal better preserve the accounting meaning from the original text.
Thank you, Shah. Now Nis will explain the importance of terminology research in this assignment.
Terminology research was very important because financial and accounting texts require consistency and precision. If different terms are used inconsistently, the meaning would become very confusing in the translation text. For example, English term, I will take 5 of the example from the glossary tables that I have created, which would be 5. Business combination, meaning that in Malay translation would be gabungan perniagaan. And second, acquisition method would be mean as kaedah pengambil alihan. Third, fair value would be mean as nilai saksama. And fourth, non-controlling interest would be meaning kepentingan tidak mengawal. And lastly, goodwill, which mean muhibah. I also researched definitions for these terms to help the translator understand the accounting concepts more clearly. For example, fair value refers to the estimate true value of an asset. Goodwill refers to intangible value gained during business acquisition. This research improved both consistency and accuracy in our translation. So that is all by me.
Thank you, Nis. Now we will discuss the translation strategies our group used throughout this assignment. During the translation process, we realized that translating a financial report is very different from translating casual text because the language must remain formal, precise, and professional. Tisha, can you explain one of the strategies our group used?
Sure. One strategy we frequently used was meaning-based translation instead of direct literal translation. So if we translated every sentence word for word, the Malay version would sound awkward and difficult to understand. So for example, the sentence control is transferred to the group could literally become kawalan dipindahkan kepada kumpulan. But in some contexts, we discussed whether using kawalan diperoleh oleh kumpulan would sound more natural. So after discussion, we have decided to maintain dipindahkan kepada kumpulan because it preserves the accounting meaning more accurately. And this shows that translators sometimes need to balance natural language with technical accuracy.
Thank you, Tisha. Aisha, what other translation strategies did the group use?
Another strategy we used was terminology standardization. Since financial reports contain repeated accounting terms, we needed to ensure the same terms were used consistently throughout the translation. For example, fair value is translated as nilai saksama, goodwill translated as muhibah, and equity remained as equity. We avoided changing terminology randomly because inconsistent terms can confuse readers and reduce the professionalism of the text. So, um, we also referred to accounting terminology commonly that is used in Malaysian financial reports.
Thank you, Aisha. Next, one major issue in translation was the sentence structure. Shah, can you explain this further?
Yes, English financial writing often uses very long sentences with multiple clauses, but Malay writing generally prefers clearer and slightly shorter sentence structures. For example, one sentence in the source text contains acquisition cost, fair value, non-controlling interest, and identifiable net assets, all within one sentence. If translated too literally, the sentence becomes extremely difficult to read. So we discussed whether to maintain the original structure or slightly reorganize the sentence for clarity. But in the end, we tried to preserve the former style while improving readability. This was important because financial reports must remain professional but also understandable.
And I also noticed that English uses passive voice very frequently in accounting reports. For example, are measured, are recognized, are accounted for. Malay can use these structures too, but excessive passive voice sometimes sounds unnatural. So we carefully adjusted some sentence while keeping the formal tone.
Now let us discuss some difficult terminology that we encountered during the project. Nis, which terms were the hardest to translate?
As for me, one difficult term was non-controlling interest. At first, we considered kepentingan bukan kawalan or kepentingan tidak mengawal. We discussed which version sound more accurate in the accounting context. Finally, we selected kepentingan tidak mengawal because it aligned better with accounting terminology used in Malaysian financial reports. Another difficult term was bargain purchase gain. Direct translation would sound unnatural, so we translate it as keuntungan daripada pembelian rumah, which preserved the meaning more clearly.
So, another difficult term was goodwill. In everyday Malay, muhibah usually relates to harmony or goodwill between communities. But in accounting, it has a completely different meaning related to intangible business value. This shows how specialized translation requires to understand the field of the context and not only the language.
Thank you to both of you. Now let us talk about teamwork and collaboration during this project. How did the collaboration help improve the translation quality? Tisha, can you start?
As for me, collaboration helped us identify mistakes that we might not notice when doing it individually. For example, I focused more on meaning during translation, but the language analyst helped refine grammar and vocabulary. So I think without peer feedback, some technical inaccuracies might remain unnoticed.
Yes, I agree with Tisha. Sometimes one member interpreted a sentence differently, so discussion helped us compare perspectives before deciding on the final version. This would improve both accuracy and confidence in our translation choices.
Yes, and also the comment feature in Google Docs was especially useful because we could highlight problematic phrases, suggest alternative, and also explain correction clearly. This made the revision process more systematic and organized.
The glossary also became a shared reference for everyone. Wherever there was a confusion about terminology, we refer back to the glossary to maintain consistency in the text.
This assignment also focused on collaborative and peer learning. Can each member explain how peer learning helped them improve?
I learned new accounting terminology from my teammates, especially during these discussion sessions. Sometimes I understood the language, but not the accounting concept. So, peer explanations were very helpful for me.
As for me, I learned how important revision is in translation. The first draft is rarely perfect, and peer comments improve the sentence structure and the terminology.
For me, as the language analyst, I learned that giving constructive feedback is important. Instead of only pointing out mistakes, I also explain why certain corrections were more suitable.
For me, I learned how terminology research support translation quality. Without proper terminology reference, translator may choose inconsistent or inaccurate terms.
We also used several online tools during the assignment. Can you share how technology helped the group?
So Google Docs was very useful because everyone could edit the document simultaneously. So it allowed us to leave comments and track revisions or changes easily that we made to the text.
I agree with Aisha. And we also used online dictionaries and accounting references to verify terminology. However, we realized that machine translation alone is not reliable for financial reports because technical meanings can become inaccurate.
And also sometimes translation tools provided literal translation that sound unnatural. So human discussion and peer review were still necessary to ensure the quality.
Now, let us discuss the most important lessons that we have learned from this project.
As for me, I have learned that translation requires both language skills and subject knowledge. Understanding accounting concepts was necessary to translate accurately.
For me, I learned that teamwork improves translation quality because different members contribute different strengths and different ideas and opinions as well.
And for me, I learned that the importance of semantic accuracy and professional writing style in specialist translation.
For me, I learned that terminology consistency is essential in business and financial translation.
Thank you, everyone. Now, let's move on to the last phase, in which we are here discussing a virtual discussion session throughout the Google Meet. We will need to discuss we will have already discussed about the differences between the original and translated versions, the challenges that we have faced during this translation, the sentence structures, technical terminology, and the strategies that we have used. We also reflect on how collaboration improved the final outcome.
One of the major challenge for me was translating long English sentences into natural Malay. English financial reports often contain passive voice, embedded clauses, and technical vocabulary. So direct translation sometimes sounded unnatural in Malay. So we needed to balance accuracy, readability, and professionalism.
Another challenge was technical terminology. Some accounting terms do not have commonly used Malay equivalents, so we needed to research official accounting vocabulary carefully. We also had to ensure that all translated sections used the same or the most consistent terminology throughout the text.
So, from the language analysis perspective, semantic accuracy was the biggest challenge because even small vocabulary changes could affect the accounting meaning significantly. And this assignment taught us that translation is not only about language but also about understanding the subject matter.
I also learned that terminology research is extremely important in specialized translation fields like finance and accounting. Without proper terminology research, translation may become inconsistent or inaccurate.
So thank you everyone. And in conclusion, this project helped us improve our translation skills, teamwork, our communication between each other, the terminology research that we have done for this task, and finally the critical analysis. They also showed us the importance of collaboration and peer learning in producing accurate and professional translations. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.